We're heading into our third panel of the day, and to moderate this panel is Parimal Nathwani, who's Vice President with Mars Innovation. You have his description in your package, but needless to say is lots of experience in finance, intellectual property management, business development, operations, those types of things. So I think he's a great guy to moderate this panel. So Parimal, come on up and take it on.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity. I'd like to invite my panelists up to the panel. Shana Kelly, Founder and Chief Technology Officer for Exogenic. Mike MacArthur, Partner, Burning Kiln Winery. Sandy Marshall, former CEO of Lanxess and Chairman of Bioindustrial Innovation Canada. And Tom Wellner, Co-CEO of Life Labs. So while the panel gets themselves organized here, I'd just like to say thanks to LSO for organizing the event. It's great to see a great turnout in the community, and the discussion has certainly been very engaging and enlightening. So the topic of our panel is best practices for life sciences SMEs to succeed in Ontario. So quite a very broad topic, and we've got a very diverse group of accomplished individuals here with us on the panel, from small companies to large companies across various aspects of the life sciences industry. And so before we sort of get into it, I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly and tell us a little bit about their role, and then we'll sort of dive right into the questions. So I'd like this to be interactive and engaging, so I have a few sort of questions here, but we will certainly leave time at the end for questions from the audience. So with that, maybe Tom, did you want to start? And we can make our way through the panel.
Hi. Thanks, Parimal. My name is Tom Wellner. I'm co-CEO of Life Labs today. I've been involved in the biotech and pharma industry globally for at least 25 years. I spent the early part of my career with Eli Lilly, but I've also, when I left the pharma industry directly, have worked as in a very entrepreneurial state, working with private equity to bring businesses out of receivership. The last couple of years, I took a jump outside of pharma and biotech after having run a contract manufacturing business for biologics into the lab sector, and I've been president and CEO up until October the 1st of a company called CML Healthcare, which does about multiple millions of tests a year for community-based laboratory diagnostics as well as diagnostic imaging across Canada. And then most recently, we worked out a deal with OMERS and Borealis Infrastructure to be acquired, and now we're merging with Life Labs, and hence I agreed to stay on as co-CEO of the new business. But I also do investing in small entrepreneurial companies and work advising them as well, so I have a passion for that outside of what I do in my day job. So that's kind of my background.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Sorry for my voice.
Test. Yep. Good. Mike MacArthur. I'm a lawyer by day job. In addition to that, involved with dealing with a winery project that we've dealt with here in Ontario, and we're going a little larger with it. And then I also have dealt with other agreements with people in particularly the ag distribution network, from dealing with small farmers and the like, that are and other activities that are actually getting involved in a larger way in the food distribution world.
Shana?
Hi, I'm Shana Kelly. I'm the CTO of Exogenic, also a founder of the company. And I got going with the development of new diagnostic technologies. Exogenic is a venture-backed startup based around the idea of bringing diagnostic testing capabilities directly to physicians by giving them instrumentation that will allow them to run diagnostic tests. And I got going in that part of the biotech industry as a co-founder of a company called Genome Sciences that was based in San Diego. It was spun out of the California Institute of Technology. I was involved with them. I've run academic labs both in Boston and more recently in Toronto. And then around 2008, the exogenic, what is now the exogenic technology, was something that was beginning to mature within my academic labs. It took about 2 years to actually get a company going, given that it was 2008, 2009. It took us till 2010 to finally get a company spun out of the lab. But we've now been up and running for about 3 years. We're venture backed. We, in the beginning, ran off of seed capital that we raised from a variety of government organizations, really helped us get going, make our first prototypes, build our core team. And then in 2012, we had our first venture-backed financing that was led by CTI Life Sciences Fund, a Montreal-based VC. And that allowed us to grow the company to about 22 people. We have now instrument and cartridge prototypes that are ready to go into a clinical trial. And we have just closed a Series B round of venture capital just a couple weeks ago that is going to take us all the way to the market. So the company's at a very exciting stage, and it's great to be here. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Shana. Sandy?
Okay, hi. I'm Sandy Marshall. I kind of come from two perspectives here. I spent 28 years in the chemical industry. For those of you who may not know Lanxess, they started out a long, long time ago as Polysar, one of the large Canadian chemical companies, and went through many morphs over the years. And in its last incarnation, or current incarnation before I left, was as a large chemical and polymers company in Canada. Two things that we did while I was in my last few years there. First was we developed an industrial park there, a bioindustrial park, for the development of our brownfield lands. The intention there was to try and bring new startup companies into the Sarnia area and engage them in the cluster that we were trying to establish there. The second part that Lanxess did is they participated as a strategic partner with a couple of startup companies in the industrial biotech space over the last few years. So that was kind of my first world. Since while I was doing some of that, and what I've been focusing on more recently is in my role as chairman of the board of the Bioindustrial Innovation Canada. Bioindustrial Innovation Canada's focus is on commercialization. It is a not-for-profit organization that started as a CSER 6 years ago and is now moving away from that. Our mission, focused on commercialization, is about creating jobs and economic growth sustainably in Canada. We focus on bio-based chemistry and sustainable chemistry startups, and there's really two platforms that we work on. One is to support startups through a number of different ways to get them off the ground and going here in Canada, and we have a very, very strong and diverse board of experienced industry, academic, and government individuals who support there. The second part of what we do is we focus on cluster development, and in this case we're not talking about research clusters per se, we're talking about industrial economic clusters where we're bringing companies together into an ecosystem where they can leverage off of each other and gain from the synergies of being in the same place. Example of that, if you go back to the 1940s, was actually the formation of the chemical valley that's in Sarnia today. Really was a formation of a cluster that formed in around the Canadian government's decision to put the rubber works there in the Second World War. So what we're trying to do now is to recreate that model with industrial biochem and sustainable chemistry companies as a second part of our platform. So to date, we manage an investment fund. We have 13 investments with $5.5 million of equity in these startup companies. That's really secondary to what we do because, of course, with $500,000 in a company, we're not changing their world, we're helping. The biggest things we do is provide network and support, advice, guidance to these companies as they try and move from the pilot through demonstration to commercialization phase. So our investment fund is one piece. Out of that, we've 3 of our companies are now have IPO'd, and we've leveraged over $140 million of funding from various sources as we've spun those companies off and attracted other investment. And with the commercialization of some of these technologies, we've been able to generate 1,800 direct, indirect, and construction jobs in the formation of these companies and the construction of these assets. Of course, what we're talking about here are startups that require significant amounts of capital. The current plant that's being built in Sarnia today by BioAmber is a $125 million first commercialization plant. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here when we start talking about venture raises and IPOs and for these sorts of companies.
Great. So since the topic is about best practices for SMEs in Ontario, we'll start with a general question for the panel, and that is, from the perspective of the SMEs that you represent, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages, so please give a balanced view, in Ontario for founders and C-executive suites to build businesses here? So maybe, Shayna, we can start with you since you've been most recently involved with building a small startup here in Ontario.
Sure. So, I think there's a number of advantages, specific to Exogenic. One of the greatest advantages that we've come to realize is the base of technical skilled workers in Ontario. I mean, in Toronto in particular, the people that come out of the University of Toronto, I think, are just as talented as the folks that you see coming out of the Stanfords, the Caltechs, the MITs of the world. And so we have a technical team that is unbelievably talented, and I think we're really uniquely, I think Toronto is uniquely suited to potentially have someday a real tech corridor based on the people that are present in the city that have that really strong training. I think we have the benefit. I mean, I think one of the reasons that Exogenic is doing so well is because we were able to access seed funding through all of the government programs that are out there, OCE, IAF, HTX, all of these funders that allowed us to kind of incubate for a couple years, get our business plan right, get the core team built, get some prototypes, get some data. And so that resource, I know, is not something you find very much in the States or other parts of the world. So I think that part of our network really helped us to be where we are today. And so I think, the government support for startups is very strong. We have really great talent. The disadvantage, I think we have really great young talent. We're a little bit thinner on, very experienced people that have taken at least products in our sector all the way to the market. And so that's a challenge for us to recruit our management level people. And that's something that we've had to put a lot of time into, but that's also something that I think as, a corridor grows, those people will be here. But, really, people ask me all the time, why you started up this company, why there weren't any other startups in your sector in Toronto, at this time, why did you start it in Toronto? I said, well, because there's great people in Toronto, there's a lot of potential, there's great science in Toronto, so, let's get some companies going there and see if we can plug the holes as we need to.
Great. Sandy, from your perspective in
Yeah,
sort of the regional zones?
Sure. I think I'll use the one example. It's the company that's actually building in Sarnia now. They looked at over 100 different places to actually commercialize their technology and develop it. And they ultimately chose to come to Sarnia and Ontario. And if you sift through all the different pieces of financing, capable people, all of the various elements of it, the one thing that they speak of that was very unique to what they found in Ontario was a collaborative culture. The fact that you have the entire community, the province, the government, the associations, all standing at your back and working together for your benefit. And that is something they didn't find as readily when they were looking at other locations, primarily in the United States, where there tended to be a little bit more of a competition sort of mindset rather than having everybody pushing or pulling in the same direction. So for this case, that was one of the key elements. Funding, SDTC is a really important funding vehicle that we have here in Canada for some of the biotechnology stuff that we're doing. So I certainly wouldn't want to forget that.
Great. So Tom, from your perspective, as a larger organization here in Ontario, looking in at smaller entities.
Sure. I think I would echo the depth of technical and talent, not just in life sciences and biotech, but also married with technology industries. There are a lot of industries or companies that cross both boundaries, where you have a marrying of the biotech and life science technology with information technology, and I think Ontario has a lot of that, and certainly the clusters are here. The other thing that I think, to add and not repeat what the other panelists have said, which I think could be taken advantage of more, or we could market more in Ontario, is the fact that we are probably the largest HMO in the world. And companies like the companies that I've been working with in the lab sector, we are providing an essential service. We get involved in about 80% of the diagnostics that happen within the province. And what we can provide is a very, very good avenue to help commercialize some of the technologies, especially if they're biotech or related or diagnostic in nature, because we've got a network of, we're interacting 25 to 30,000 patients a day. We're doing 700,000 to 800,000 tests 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We've got access to huge amounts of data, both prospective, retrospective data that isn't fully utilized. And we also, as we've done with our own business, we like to, and I like to partner personally with smaller businesses that have good technology that can fit and we can help commercialize. I think there's a fallacy out there, frankly, in Canada that Canadians will not pay for privately provided healthcare, and I think that is very much a fallacy. We've been able to introduce tests alongside the publicly funded model where patients with healthcare spending accounts, et cetera, will pay out of their pocket for screening tests, other kinds of diagnostics. So I think if it's well thought through and you've got a plan that allows that, I think if you can have that kind of dialogue, it's good for us and it's good for the entrepreneurial companies as well.
Great. And Mike, any sort of thoughts from the legal perspective or any?
Legal perspective, I know we get this often. People will come and they'll actually, especially that are in the early stages, they'll be reluctant to even want to come to a lawyer, not surprisingly. But the way that I sit down and define it with them very, very initially is that it's all about the 3 R's. And it's relationships, relationships, and relationships. And so instead of trying to sit there and say this is the normal agreement or this is what it is, what we're there to do is try to establish what are the relationships that the business is currently at, and also what are the relationships that they have to establish going forward, because those relationships will change and those expectations will change going down the road quite dramatically as they get larger. And they have to know when they're into a position where they have to step into it heavy, and also at other times where they're going to be stepping back as it grows.
Great. So talent has come up a couple of times in the discussion already, and clearly an important part of building successful businesses, not only in life sciences, but really across all different disciplines. But could we maybe provide some guidance and some tactical suggestions to entrepreneurs who are in the audience and out there on really how do you actually access this talent, especially as a smaller entity that may not necessarily be able to offer all the sort of bells and whistles that some of the larger corporations are able to offer. So maybe Tom, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I think as I interact with a lot of entrepreneurs, it's very clear you've got limited time, you've got limited resource. Sourcing expertise is critical. I think there are lots of networks here in Ontario to do that, to provide. Again, it goes back to being thoughtful in your partnership exercise. You're going to have to, for the most part, partner if it's a biotech company with a contract manufacturing business. You're going to have to partner with a contract research organization. You need expertise as well in business planning. I think too many business plans that I see tend to come at the problem from the top down, saying, okay, I have a solution to diabetes, and diabetes is an epidemic, so my product or my diagnostic is going to change diabetes. If you can get expertise and source expertise that can help you build your business case from the bottom up, show me how the first 100 patients are going to benefit, how your segments are going to work, those kinds of things, I think can be very, very helpful and much help differentiate you from other business plans. That to me sticks very much when I can see somebody in groups. And if you can get people available here, and there are lots of people with lots of expertise that can help you segment the market and get to the data and build your plan layer by layer, because the people that you're getting on your technology first are probably not going to be the ones that are going to be the 100,000th or the millionth person that or area that's benefited.
So Shayna, you built your company recently from more or less 0 to 22, and I know you've sourced a lot of local talent, but I know you've also been able to recruit talent from outside of Ontario to Ontario here. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of how you went about doing that, and sort of what sort of attracted talent to Ontario?
Yeah, so we found that our most effective strategy is really to partner with actually one particular local recruiter who is absolutely unbelievable. And we've tried using, all the big shops and the brand names and never really gotten anywhere. But with local people that really kind of know their network, know people in different parts of the world that maybe have some Canadian connection, we've been very successful in working those connections and bringing people in. And so that's been a very important part of the equation. And then even for, those are for some of our bigger hires, even, the formation of the technical team, which is critical for us. We've developed a strategy of kind of looking in the local community for people that have always kind of taken the harder path. You can look at people that graduate from U of T and you can see they always elected to not go through the easy engineering track. They went through the hard engineering track, and those are the kinds of things that tell you that this person probably has what it takes to deal with the environment at a startup. So we've developed a few strategies like that, and then we found that it's always about, when we're trying to attract the best and the brightest, really being able to articulate a vision that says, this is what we could do. This is why we're here every day. We could change the world with what we're doing. And for the right kind of person that is really going to be able to contribute at a very small company doing really hard work, articulating that vision, it just always seems to work. They always seem to buy into being part of that. And so that's something that we also spend a lot of time on.
Great. Very tactical advice. Mike?
We've always looked at it from what we were doing as really persistence and the type of people that were going to be open-minded. We've had to do that because as it goes and evolves and changes, if you don't have that flexibility, you could be into some difficulties very early. The other thing is that I've often said in the sort of advising side of it is you don't know what you don't know. And so the first two rules are really important because you have to know when you don't know something, or you have to rely on somebody else to get you there. So choosing your partners has to become really a critical point going forward.
And Sandy, your
Yeah,
perspective?
One more thing I'll add to the last statement is build yourself a diverse board. A board is a source of talent that you have that you can leverage. And in those really early stages, when you're 2, 3 people and you don't have a lot of bandwidth, putting together a good diverse board who can cover off a lot of the elements, have breadth of experience, in most cases decades of experience, you can pull off of them, and they do give you that ability to answer some of those questions that you don't know before you run across them. So a diverse board, I think, is very, very helpful for startups.
Yeah, I was going to add to that as well because you twigged a thought. Some of the smaller, more successful companies that I've seen usually tend to be a scientific founder that's founded them, and that's tremendously valuable when the technology is early on in the process and you're developing it or bringing it through clinicals or whatever. The ones that become successful in the long term are usually the ones that can recognize the timing when it's better to shift away from science and more towards business, and being able to bridge that, bring in either a CEO with more business experience and less scientific experience, and to be able to make that work really well. The ones that have been less successful I've seen where it's a hang-on, and their activities, they're great science folks, but less good on the business side, and vice versa when business people get into scientific roles. So it's really tweaking apart when the right time is to pass the baton, so to speak, or shift roles.
And a little bit sort of off script, but here, Shayna, do you sort of have a comment on that? I know that you've been sort of straddling both sides for quite some time in both your entrepreneurial endeavors, and you've been quite successful both on sort of the science and business side. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, it is a very tricky thing to manage, because our philosophy at Exogenic is that we keep our management team as lean as possible so that we really put our resources towards getting the technology to market. We all recognize that at some point we want to be a business, and so there's going to be a time where we need a lead of the organization who has really the business expertise. But I think we've put together a great strategy through the early years of the company where I'm kind of the day-to-day lead, but we have a very strong board with diversity and a lot of business experience. And then we have an executive chairman who's a part-time CEO who he's done, I don't know, 10 different venture-backed startups, something like that. He's really been around the industry, very well connected. And so by having him, by having a very strong financial person, a great board, we've been able to kind of function with science kind of front and center, but with an eye on business. And then at some point, when the scientific part of things and the technical agenda is really approaching maturity, then we'll shift into a different mode. But I think it's important at the beginning, it's important in the middle, it's important in the later stages to always make sure that the team is there and balanced, that the right things are being taken into consideration all the way.
Great. So certainly it's all about timing. So the other topic, obviously, that's I'm sure top of mind with respect to building successful SMEs in Ontario is access to capital. And certainly be very interested to hear from the panel here. Given the capital constraints of the market that we exist in, especially in the area of life sciences, what do you think some of the creative financing approaches that have been used, could you comment on some of the creative approaches that you've seen, and what's been successful and what hasn't been successful? And Mike, maybe you can start off with that one.
I can talk from a number of perspectives on it. But where I've seen it successful is really it comes down to, as was mentioned earlier, your core team. If you've got a really great, credible core team and you've got good quality, that's going to attract other investors, whether it's going to be, and you can leverage that too to some degree, especially when you're small and starting out. And I know that we've actually done that from a couple other ventures that we've dealt with already. And then, of course, with that credibility, you can sort of build it into the other funding mechanisms. And I'm not really necessarily as familiar with some of the other things that they're talking about, but I could see that being led into by analogy into these other areas quite easily. But that's what we've done is really look at it. And you have to, I think there was the comment saying that down the road it's going to come down to value and also being able to justify being accountable. And I think that's really part of that quality of the organization that starts right from the beginning.
So Tom, how about yourself? I know you're quite an active investor and engager with SMEs, and tell us a little bit about the types of things you've seen that have worked and haven't worked from a financing perspective.
I mean, in addition to, Ontario does present a tremendous opportunity to gain support from various pots of of government funding and granting, which is unusual compared to other jurisdictions. But, you know, one of the areas which I think is very important is the concept of getting intelligent capital into your business. And what I mean by that is, if you can do that, most entrepreneurial ventures will start off where their rounds will come from either mortgaging their own house or friends and family, and it'll be high net worth folks that have either made a ton of money in mining and oil and gas or whatever other sector that's massive in Canada, and they're looking for places to put some capital to work, but they don't bring necessarily a depth of understanding along with it, nor do they bring what I would call a proxy to your technology. So if you can get that early on in your business and find that through some of the network of people that are actually in this room, I know Peter Vandervelden with the CVCA, there's a lot of folks that can provide that, not just access to the physical capital, but access to the intellectual capital that and the vetting capital that goes along with it. I think those can be very, very important for successful entrepreneurial ventures. And then the third thing I would just say on the subject is there are far too many companies that run to IPO too early in this country. There is a smattering of great businesses with great technology that run off and think that they need to IPO to get additional capital, and they spend more of their time focusing on managing the investment community than they do on driving their technology forward or bringing their technology. So if you can stay private or figure out other ways to do that and don't go for the pot of gold because you think you're going to get a big lift or a big payout or whatever it is, the costs of, even for a company the size of CML Healthcare, which when we sold earlier this year was $1 billion market cap company, we were spending $3 million on public company costs a year, and I thought that was too much, let alone if you're a company that has 0 to 5 million in revenue and you're spending $1 million a year on a board and on public company costs and everything else. So the longer you can defer that, I think the more successful you'll be. So look for mechanisms to access capital at different points than getting told by service providers that the best way to do it is to run to the IPO market.
So Shayna, can you tell us a little bit more or expand on the smart money concept? I know you've been able to bring some really seasoned VC groups into your syndicate.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have just closed a round that was led by Domain, a venture group based in San Diego and Princeton. And Paramel, you started off talking about creative ways to raise capital. We, I think, have been incredibly uncreative with the way that we have funded the company, but it has been very deliberate. So, we started off with seed money that got us going, as I mentioned, money coming from governmental organizations that helped us get going. Then we knew we were ready for some venture capital, and we kind of scaled up with that. And going into this round, we had a great board, a great set of investors. We had a strategic investor that was a diagnostic company, but we knew that going into this round and with the activities we have in front of us, that we really needed people that had been in exactly the business that we're going to be in, so point-of-care diagnostics as investors and as members of our board. So we really had a targeted strategy. I mean, I'm saying that, but of course we talked to absolutely everybody who would take a meeting with us, but we did have a targeted strategy where we really wanted, a venture capital group that was really a leader in the commercialization of point-of-care diagnostics and in the diagnostic sector in general. And we were fortunate that we really ended up with just the best of the best leading our Series B. And it is, it closed 2 weeks ago, but it is already really paying off for us. And we have had, some of the top people that were involved in launching the BioSite platform, one of the original point-of-care diagnostic platforms. We've had them look at some of the things that we're doing. We've had top people from Affymetrix and Illumina and just all kinds of people now pulled in to looking at what we're doing, leveraging their experience, helping us make some key decisions right now. And I think that's what that kind of money can get you is access to a network of people that you might not have had access to otherwise. And again, where we're building something that's very new, you know, here in Toronto, where we don't really have that experience base, it's just been, you know, phenomenal. So that's from our perspective, you know, that was the idea all along, to kind of build ourselves, pulling in different kinds of people at different times, but through very uncreative mechanisms that you know, don't have a very high success rate these days, but we managed to pull it off.
Sandy, can you tell us a little bit about sort of with your sort of investment fund and your sort of experiences, what you've seen as sort of the creative side of financing in this environment?
Sure. Well, I think the one thing that hasn't really been talked about here is strategics. And maybe I'll spend a little bit of time talking a bit about them, because I was part of a strategic before, and a number of the companies in our portfolio have relationships or are looking for relationships with strategics. Let me say that to get a good strategic, you have to have a real value proposition. These strategics are going around the world looking at all the best technologies. They look in every nook and cranny, and they often have a broader perspective of all of the competing technologies that appear to be in your space than you might have yourself. Once they see the real value proposition and they come in, that's great, because usually the biggest thing that they bring besides capital is they actually give you market access, because usually most of the strategics are coming in from the back end, and so they can help pull you through the market. That's all the good stuff, but you got to keep them at arm's length. And that's really one of the pieces I would say that when you're working with strategics is, one, they are good with the market pull. Two, they're helpful on your board providing advice. But the cultures of strategics versus the startups are so different. You think about a startup or an SME thinks about a timeline of decision making of days and hours. Decision making inside of strategics and multinationals that's impossible for those sorts of decisions to move at that pace. And I've seen situations where the startups are spending more time trying to move the strategic along to a decision so that they can move forward. That sometimes even question the value of the funding they've been getting, because it really can drag you down, and one of the things that you need to do is be able to move quickly and nimbly. So if you're getting together with a strategic, make sure that you keep them out of the decision-making process as much as you possibly can. Use them for what they're really great for, which is bringing you money, bringing you market pull, and also bringing you reputation. But try and keep the decision-making processes in the culture of the startup, and don't let the multinational or the strategic decision-making process take over.
That's very valuable advice. So that's sort of a nice segue into my next question here around partnerships. So partnerships also represent an attractive mechanism for various aspects of SMEs, from not only capital but also technology development and accessing expertise and infrastructure that SMEs may not necessarily have access to. Could you tell us a little bit about what a small company can do to prepare itself for a partnership that is going to be effective? I mean, there's lots of examples. We've all been part of examples where partnerships have been started off with sort of good intent but have gone sideways. I think there's more examples of those than successful partnerships. So what is it that a small company can do to prepare itself for effective partnership? Tom?
Yeah, we love partnerships, actually, because it allows us to focus on what we do well, which is large volume testing, logistics, data information, keeping regulators happy, providing information to physicians. What we don't want to do is get into the development world of diagnostics, and so it's better that we present a commercial support. That's the part that we can do very well. So what can a company do to prepare for working successfully with somebody like us? I think it really just comes down to being crystal clear on what your technology will do and what it won't do, and being realistic, making sure that you do enough to develop the diagnostic but not be too far along where there's not flexibility to allow us to fit it into our network properly. We also, as Shauna mentioned, the point of care testing for us is an area that we see as a strategically important area that's going to develop in concert with the fixed sites that we operate with a central laboratory. So we need to have flexibility on understanding where we can utilize both types of technology. So for us, being able to work with the partner and for having a partner that can be open to having some dialogue on those and coming down to an agreement on what makes sense is good. And then I guess lastly, I'd just say make sure that there's adequate data behind the technology. I think often a couple of partnerships that we have, we've brought the product to market or the service to market, and there may be somewhat adequate data, but it's not fully adequate yet. So we have to supplement and work together to make sure that things are consistently done.
Great. Mike?
I'm looking at it much earlier in the partnership stage, and usually I'll sort of give it from a perspective of a lawyer. I'll actually ask them whether or not they've actually gone through strategic planning sessions, because sometimes I'm amazed at how they've gone on and they've been creating things, but they've never really entered into any strategic planning. So they don't really understand exactly what they're doing, or they're looking around, and you'll see this with some of the partners. You'll see they're all of one mind in one area, but they're completely different in other areas. And it's important for them to really get down very quickly to determine who's going to have the strength in one area to develop. And so my encouragement is for those partners to really identify what their core strengths are and also what their weaknesses are, so that they can actually move forward when they start to develop these out and start to deal with people up the food chain.
Great. Shana?
Yeah, so I agree very much with Sandy's comments about strategic investors partnering that side of it, because we have a strategic investor, and it's a little bit like being a mouse standing next to an 800-pound gorilla, and it's like the gorilla doesn't even know if he accidentally stepped on the mouse and the mouse is gone, right? It just is, the relationship is a difficult one to manage because the two organizations are just out of whack in terms of the amount of control they have of what's going on. So that part of it we've managed, and it's been a challenge on partnerships that we're kind of going out and looking for. We do a lot of looking because we want to understand what different companies' needs are, companies that maybe aren't that interested in point-of-care medical diagnostic testing, but want to be able to test food or water or other things, just to understand, what are the specifications, what are those markets like, what are the margins like. And so we do a lot of exploratory, conversations, that kind of thing around it. Back in the office, we kind of collect a lot of information, but one of our mantras is that we really stay laser focused on our first product, and we really have that product 100% solid, the data there, regulatory approval there, so that we're really able to push out that first product into the market, hopefully on our own. And then we think that will then be a platform from which we can then really engage with partners meaningfully from a strong position. And so that's been our philosophy, is to really understand who the players are, who we could work with, what the partnerships might look like, what are the interesting things for us to go after, but to at the same time be fairly conservative about pursuing any of it.
Great. And before we open the floor to questions, Sandy, did you want to chime in here?
Well, I think I'll add just a little bit to the last two comments, because I think they were key. First, on the strategic planning piece, out of a strategic plan comes a business plan and execution plan. And then from there comes focus on your priorities and get them right. So that's what you need to do internally. And once you've got that in place and you know what your focuses are, then you can start figuring out where your gaps are and where your needs are. Then you can start to find who your partners need to be. And because if you go out with everybody wanting to have a partnership with everybody, you will have partnerships with everybody, and you'll lose your focus, and you'll be distracted, and you'll lose the focus on your priorities. So I think it really comes back to focusing yourselves and having that clear plan and priorities, and then figuring out strategically where you go with your partnerships and relationships.
So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. You've got a very esteemed, experienced panel up here, and it's not often we get an opportunity to take advantage of that. So let's see if we can stimulate some discussion.
Hi, Jackie Sonkapiran, Medical Technology Commercialization Advisor. I work with early stage technology scientists and entrepreneurs, and I help them develop a business model. So the idea of the value proposition and the first target market is really key. Thomas, you mentioned where that first target market could be limited to, say, your first 100 that you're going to be working with. That obviously will be a different value proposition than a more broader market that might appeal to investors more broadly. Is there any advice you could give with regards to what I could tell some of these early stage entrepreneurs? Should they be focusing on creating a business model for these first 100? And also Shayna, or should they be focusing on the bigger picture, or do they need to focus on both and know how to connect those dots?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great dilemma. It's the marketer's challenge, right? If you aren't specific on your segment, you can't get started, but then everybody says, oh, well, you're missing all these other segments that are out there. And I think the other balance that Shanna mentioned was, keeping laser focused on your primary asset, because that's what's driving your today's value. But then you also have to balance off what else are you doing, because if investors like your first asset, they also want to know what's in your pipeline. So those are always the two challenges. For me, it's very important that you get really a deep understanding of what the clinical paradigm is that you're selling into. What is a current natural paradigm within let's use colon cancer as an example. You need to know exactly how the primary care physician thinks, how the GI specialist that's doing a colonoscopy thinks, how the patient is thinking, and if you have a technology that's very interesting scientifically, but it changes a current treatment paradigm, you're up for a lot more market sensitivity work and education. If you can get one that you know exactly where in the treatment paradigm it will fit, so if you have a screening test for colon cancer that can then better position a patient for who should get and who shouldn't get a colonoscopy, that to me is going to be a much more efficient introduction into the market than one where we have another test that we're looking at, which is prostate cancer biopsy, but the former fits in nicely to the treatment protocol for a colonoscopy. The latter fundamentally changes how you do a prostate biopsy. That one's going to take a hell of a lot more market education and a lot more work to really get the segment prepared to market into. So I think that's where I would kind of answer your question. So if you can pick that out in your marketing plan, fit it into a natural treatment spot, your uptake will be much faster, and then you can bring your other segments on. But you also need to concentrate your efforts, and that's also the other argument I'd have for really focusing on getting those first 100 patients really nailed down. You build from that, build from the success, and then keep doing it. If you don't hit the right segment off the top, you'll end up answering questions, and then the interest in your technology will wane over time, and it'll be even harder to get the next ones on.
Thanks.
You want to, Shayna?
I agree with all of Tom's points, and I think this is one of the hardest things about new technologies, which are always some form of a hammer that needs to find a nail, and finding the right nail. We certainly had our challenges around it. I mean, we had a platform technology that we thought could basically detect anything. I mean, it can, but we had to kind of try on different versions of a business plan to really find the thing that made sense, just feasibility, the clinical pull for the product, all of these different things you have to think about. And it's challenging if you're not sitting in industry with all that experience, but instead kind of sitting on the technology development side, because things may sound good superficially. You read an article about something in the newspaper, it's like, oh, well, we should do that. That sounds very important. We're going to save lives, this and that. But we found in the end that the thing that you have to do is get out there and talk to the clinical community, because problems that sound compelling if you read them in the newspaper sound very different when it is explained to you through the clinical lens. And so we've done a lot of that. And the other thing that we found is that it's very important for a new technology, a platform going out for the first time, to find a market that you can think of as a very large market. I mean, to raise the kind of capital that we've raised, we've had to be able to talk about very large markets that we could address. But at the same time, it almost needs to have niche markets within it so that we can scale up, with a plan that makes sense and kind of go one place and then go another place and kind of build up capacity as we go. So that's something, we have a market now and a product that we really believe in, and we've discovered that about that market, that there are little parts of it that we can take one at a time, and it really leads to a much more feasible strategy.
Thanks.
Great. More questions from the audience?
Chris Halling from the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Tom talked about this point where there's a decision you need to make about moving from science to business and bring in sort of a richer set of functional sort of business skills. To what extent do those people still need to have life sciences experience, or could they be brought in completely sort of cold with functional expertise from another industry here in Toronto?
I personally believe that you can bring a broader, or should look to a broader set of business skills beyond just the depth of scientific regulatory. Those tend to be the ones that are in most abundance here. And then secondly, I think there is very much an overlap between a lot of what you see in the life science space with a lot of the meshing of information technology, so the chips and pills and diagnostics with, doing spit tests on your iPhone and anything. If anybody's had an opportunity to listen to Eric Topol talk about all the various diagnostics, there is such an overlap between things that are information technology related and medicine now that the lines are very much blurring. So for me, that's a natural area to go and look for overlap. And then I also think the other part that's probably underplayed is if you've got access to somebody that's got an understanding of how consumers behave, get that into your thinking relatively early on, because I think in addition to knowing the clinical treatment paradigm, today more and more consumers are becoming highly active in their healthcare. So anything along that line, if you can have somebody who understands retail strategy, or how maybe in a consumer packaged goods, or how patients behave or may interact, can be very valuable in your early stages.
Time for maybe one more question.
Okay, I'll take this one. A lot of life sciences companies don't have IPO as an exit strategy, or they can't have IPO as an exit strategy. So this one's really for Mike, because I'd like to pull you out of your lawyer hat and into your burning kiln hat. And can you tell us how you identified your partners that are involved with Burning Kiln, and the requirements for really high quality expertise in the winemaking side of it to make you successful?
That's just because you want to know about the wine industry, John. You're better to leave it to drinking wine. In the wine industry, as probably many of you know, it's the difficulty in Ontario is that it's really dominated by one distributor, which is the LCBO. So that makes marketing really a very, very significant issue. But there are other strategies around it that we want to take a look at. So the issue of regulation becomes a significant part of it, and of course political lobbying and understanding the overall industry, not only nationally but internationally. So from a standpoint of taking a look at our partners, many of whom are really local, if I can put it that way, but they come in it with other broader perspectives, and they're prepared to challenge sort of the status quo. And so when in our particular case, I had the luxury of actually choosing the partners and going to them, and when we asked for the participation, it was as well with that idea in mind that we didn't want just dumb money. We wanted intelligent money, and we wanted working partners with us. So when you get into these highly regulated fields, which the alcohol industry is in Ontario, is incredibly like that. It's, as I've often called it, it's we're still subject to the Presbyterian hangover here in Ontario. We're going to get over it eventually, but what it does is it's really made for this wild and woolly world of regulations. So as I've heard talk through the day today about regulations and the like, it really is an area where again, there's challenges, but there's real opportunities if you actually get in and find out about those regulations and really conquer that stuff as well.
Great. So just to wrap up here, I'd ask the panel to sort of give us one sentence as their parting thought with respect to, if you were to advise an Ontario-based entrepreneur about building a business here in Ontario, what piece of advice would you give them based on your experience? In one sentence. We'll start on the other side. Sandy?
Establish a strong network and leverage it.
Shayna?
I hadn't thought about this one, but you know, my father, I said, it could be worse. You could have no feet.
Mike?
Value strong relationships.
And Tom?
Choose your partners carefully.
Great. Well, with that, I thank this esteemed panel, and thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, as a token of our appreciation, so before we break, can I get Carol Culhane to come up here, and she's going to do a little commercial. I know you weren't ready for this, Jason, but it's just a little commercial.
Thank you, John. International Food Focus, my company, we have a booth here today, and we're sponsoring a draw for this item. It is a Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation toolbox, hence the color pink, and partial proceeds for the toolbox go to the foundation. And there are a number of other items. Shayna Kelly was mentioning the perfect nail. This might be the perfect hammer. And there is a tape measure level. How many times have you tried to hang a picture by yourself? And a multi-head screwdriver. And other items in the product group that I don't have here today are a pink hard hat, and there are 2 different sizes of tool belts in pink leather. So towards the end of the day, I'm going to ask Jason or John to draw a business card out of the toolbox, so please drop by the booth. If you aren't the lucky recipient, speaking of partners, Home Hardware is their retail partner. So if you want to get this item for someone on your Christmas list, just drop by Home Hardware. Thank you. Wasn't in the toolbox. Sorry about that.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes, maybe 15, for a break. So if we can all go out and you can put your cards in Carol's thing and visit all the other exhibitors, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much.
So I actually have a job again.
Okay, we want to know you.